She didn't carry a business card. She didn't step out of a luxury car. No one in that room knew her name, and for that reason alone, they assumed she didn't have one. An old cardigan, silent flat shoes, an unbranded canvas bag, that was all it took for them to rule her out of any inheritance speculation. To them, she wasn't part of the family. She was just a wrinkle in this extravagant performance. They laughed, they whispered, they didn't even bother to hide their contempt. But what they didn't know was that everything had already started going wrong. From the very moment she walked in, because the woman they were mocking hadn't come to ask for a share. She came to witness, and in just a few minutes, those sitting upright with smug faces would find their names erased not from the will, but from the illusion they had of themselves. She walked into a room where every chair was velvet-lined, every glass of wine cost a month's wage for an average person, and every glance carried the weight of inherited power. The crystal atrium glistened with chandeliers and self-importance. This was the reading of Alexander Astoria's will, and everyone present was certain they'd hear their name until she arrived. She wasn't dressed to impress. A linen ash-gray dress, a pale blue cardigan worn with time, her hair tied neatly in a low bun. Not a single detail suggested she belonged here, but she didn't hesitate. Didn't bow her head, didn't ask for permission. She simply walked quietly, as if every scornful stare slid right past her without leaving a mark, and indeed, they were. Sebastian was the first to break the silence, with a sneer. "Who let the cleaning staff in here?" Juliet turned to Celeste, chuckling as she lifted her phone to snap a photo. Maybe one of the poor exes, begging for a slice. A story was posted, a cruel caption, and a room full of people laughing along as if cruelty was second nature. But she remained silent. She simply adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, a gesture so small it was nearly invisible. Yet in that moment, it carried a dignity no one in that room could define. She chose to stand by the large window where the sunlight fell, just enough to catch every loose strand of hair around her face. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't challenge. She didn't retreat. Her presence unsettled them because she did nothing, and that was what made her so threatening. No one knew who she was. No one remembered inviting her, but what they never expected was that she was the only one in that room who had the right to stand there more than anyone seated on those velvet thrones. Isabel had barely taken a moment to stand still when the whispers began to catch fire. Juliet scoffed, looking directly at her and speaking loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "Does she think this is a charity giveaway?" Celeste laughed, swirling her wine glass. Canvas bag, flat shoes, that dreamy stare. She looks like a background character in a play she doesn't even understand. A photo was snapped. A caption was typed. "Stranger at the inheritance table." The likes climbed, but Isabel's gaze never left the empty chair in front of her. She didn't look at them. She didn't flinch. She didn't fight back. Standing just behind her, Maxwell slipped a piece of paper into her bag strap, Astoria's charity case. The room erupted with laughter as Juliet read it aloud, like it was some kind of group joke. Sebastian tapped his champagne glass and said, "Somebody call security, or at least get her an apron so she fits the scene." Mocking words, icy glares, laughter spreading like a virus, and Isabel didn't move an inch. She simply reached for her bag strap again, gently adjusting it, as if brushing off a speck of dust, unworthy of her attention. She didn't need to shout to be heard. Her silence steady as stone was the only thing in the room, beginning to make people uncomfortable, because if she wasn't afraid, wasn't embarrassed, didn't back down, then who exactly was she? At exactly 10 a.m., the front doors opened. Mr. Whitmore, Alexander Astoria's personal attorney, entered in a flawlessly tailored grey suit, carrying an old weathered leather briefcase heavy with its contents. No one spoke, but the entire room fell silent, as if everyone instinctively understood the time for division had come. He placed the briefcase on the table, unlocked it, and retrieved a red, wax-sealed envelope. All eyes were on him, until he paused, glanced around the room, and his gaze landed on Isabel. Just for a second, but it was enough to ignite suspicion. Vincent immediately stood up and pointed straight at her. "I object. That woman is not part of the Astoria family. No one knows who she is. This is a scam." Evelyn chimed in, her emerald earrings swaying with her high-pitched contempt. "She's here to take something that's not hers. Just look at her bag. I bet she doesn't even have ID in it." A wave of murmurs spread across the room. Maxwell nodded and smirked. "This is a will, reading, not a free lunch." She stood there unmoved, her hand gently rested on the strap of her bag, her gaze fixed on the chair Mr. Whitmore was about to take. No attempt to justify herself, no spark of anger, and that very silence made the accusations snowball, as if not defending herself was proof of guilt. They didn't need evidence, just one excuse to unleash their disdain on someone who didn't look like them. In a room where everything had a price, from a smile to a shade of lipstick, a woman with nothing to be priced became the easiest target to destroy. But what they still didn't understand was this: the one who stands still in the middle of a storm isn't doing so because she's weak, but because she knows the storm itself is about to be unmasked. Mr. Whitmore opened the envelope, his voice steady and clear as the room held its breath. "The legal will of Alexander Astoria. Alexander, leave my entire estate, shares, real estate holdings, and executive authority over the Astoria Corporation to the only person who ever stayed by my side. Not for money, not for fame, but for who I truly am. My wife, Isabel." That single sentence landed like a stone, tossed into a lake. Everyone thought was still. The room froze for a moment, then exploded into chaos. Juliet screamed, "No way, he didn't have a wife." Sebastian laughed nervously, almost frantic. "Who even is she? A linen dress con artist?" Evelyn shook her head, her tone sharpening. "She can't be an Astoria. She just can't," while they flailed in outrage. Isabel remained still, in the corner of the room, her hand resting lightly on the strap of her canvas bag, her eyes never leaving the empty chair where her name had just been spoken. No gasp, no surprise, no need to defend herself. Mr. Whitmore continued pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. Marriage certificate, wedding photos, handwritten letters from Alexander joint bank accounts, all notarized, verified, and legally archived. The entire room was drowned in confused fury. Those who just moments ago had called her a beggar now looked at one another like children caught lying. But Isabel didn't look at them. She didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, and a single sentence was all it took to make everyone in that room one by one question the foundation of their own false pride. As the wave of objections continued to rise, Mr. Whitmore calmly placed the folder on the table and turned on the large screen behind him. A video appeared, Alexander, a few years younger, beaming in a simple suit, standing beside Isabel in a pristine white dress, hand in hand in front of City Hall. They kissed, they laughed, they were blessed, there were witnesses, dates, everything. No one in the room had any ground left to deny it. The once boisterous room now held only the sound of the projector humming and the tightly held breaths of those who had just called Isabel a joke. Juliet lowered her head, lips pressed tight, Sebastian gripped the side of his chair, eyes locked on the screen, but unable to face the truth unfolding before him. Isabel stepped toward the table, her flat shoes barely making a sound on the marble floor. Yet each step landed like a hammer, striking the pride of everyone in the room. She didn't wait for an invitation. She didn't ask for permission. She simply walked up, stood beside Mr. Whitmore, and then turned to face them all. "I didn't come here for the inheritance," she said, her voice low, steady, not loud, but cold and solid as stone. "I came to see, when no one knew who I was, who among you still remembered how to treat another human being." Each word she spoke peeled off another mask. "Thank you for making it so clear that even without a will, I already knew who deserved to walk out of this room from the very beginning." The room was still reeling from what had just unfolded when Isabel reached into her bag and pulled out a small remote. She said nothing more, simply pressed the button. The screen behind her shifted to a live feed. A softly lit room came into view. A man sat quietly in front of the camera. And then, Alexander. Astoria lifted his head. The entire room gasped in horror. Eyes widened, mouths fell open, but no words came out. It couldn't be him. He had been declared missing more than 6 months ago. But there he was, his hair slightly grayer, his eyes just as sharp. His face now, solemn, but still carrying the commanding presence that once made entire boardrooms fall silent. He stared straight into the camera, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm not dead. I had to disappear to see clearly who among you truly cared for me and who only loved what I owned. I know everything that happened here today. Isabel showed me something I once refused to believe, and sadly, she was right." Each sentence shattered the illusions in the room into pieces. Isabel didn't look at anyone. She simply stood still, the remote still in her hand. Her expression unreadable. But there was no mistaking her silence now. It was no longer weakness or submission. It was a strength. And now everyone understood. She wasn't standing there just because Alexander loved her, but because she had been chosen to strip every mask in that room away, once and for all. The back doors swung open. The murmurs died instantly. No one could mistake that figure. Alexander Astoria in the flesh. No longer just an image on a screen. He wore no power suit, no $1 million watch. Just a plain, dark suit, slightly worn shoes, and eyes tired but sharp as steel. He walked steadily to the front of the room. Each step weighted with the authority of a man who had built this empire from nothing. No one dared to breathe. When he stopped beside Isabel, his hand gently touched hers, a final confirmation. Then he turned to face the room. Everything that happened today was part of Isabel's plan. This will be reading my disappearance. The hidden cameras recording every word spoken in this room. She didn't need your belief. She needed you to reveal your true selves, and you did it without anyone forcing you. He turned to Juliet. "You turned the woman I love into a joke on the internet. Who are you to define someone else's worth?" Then looked directly at Sebastian. "You called her a maid just because you didn't recognize the name on her purse. You know nothing about honor, so of course you have no right to claim any." He nodded toward Whitmore, who quietly opened a second folder. "I will now read the legally binding addendum to the will." Whitmore announced, "All individuals who insulted, demeaned, or disrespected Mrs. Isabel Astoria today, as recorded by camera, witnessed by others, or evidenced by any stored documentation, are hereby and permanently removed from all rights to inheritance shares, positions, and financial associations with the Astoria Corporation." No one objected. No one dared. He began reading, "Juliet Langston, Sebastian, Astoria, Evelyn Mercer, Vincent Hayes, Maxwell Thorne. Each name was pronounced like a sentence, and with every name, a security guard stepped forward, calm but firm, to escort the person out of the room. No resistance, no defense. They had no right. Their power, their shares, their status, their legacy meant nothing now when faced with a man who could point and say leave. The room that had once echoed with laughter mockery and the smug chatter of those who fancied themselves superior now stood empty. Only a few remained. Mr. Whitmore still beside the table, quietly closing the final folder. An old gardener standing in the corner, the same man who had gently offered Isabel a glass of water when she first arrived. A wedding witness from the video, now in tears, not from grief, but from the quiet joy of seeing justice truly exist. And Isabel, still herself, still in her faded linen dress, still wearing that frayed cardigan, still holding her unbranded canvas bag. But now, she was the only one left standing with no need to prove anything. Alexander turned to her and, without saying a word, gave her a simple nod. The kind of nod from a man who had once symbolized power. Now bowing before the woman a whole room had once declared didn't belong. Isabel looked around, her gaze passing over the empty chairs, the abandoned glasses of wine, the portraits hanging on the walls she no longer needed to look up to. "I didn't come here to be acknowledged," she said, her voice not loud, but striking at the core of everything still lingering in that room. "I came to see if any one of you had the courage to show kindness, even when you didn't know who I was." She stepped slowly forward, her words still ringing clearly. "And it's sad that most of you couldn't pass the simplest test to see another person without judging their shoes, their bag, or the brand on their clothes. To see a person as a person." She paused, her eyes resting on the chair where Juliet had once sat, now marked only by a discarded designer scarf. "I had hoped I was wrong. I wanted to walk out of this room thinking that at least one of you, just one, would look me in the eyes and smile, not knowing who I was. But no, all I saw was fear. Fear of guilt, by association, of losing your seat, of being mistaken for someone not wealthy enough." Isabel turned to Alexander. The look they exchanged wasn't one of triumph. It was one of sorrow, the kind that comes from having to do this just to see the true faces of those once called family. He nodded a silent apology. Then he turned to the few who remained. "They weren't worthy," he said, "but you are." He walked to each of them, those who had stayed silent, who hadn't laughed, who hadn't joined in the cruelty, and shook their hands. No need for big gestures. Just one kind look, one simple act was enough, not to be erased from the only thing he still valued: trust. Isabel stepped into the center of the room. There was no applause, no judgmental stares. She stood there, not as a victor, but as the last one left with her dignity untouched. "I don't need Alexander's money. I never did," she said, her voice softer now. "I just wanted this world to have at least one room, just one where a woman in an old cardigan could stand still without being torn apart by prejudice. And today, I stood still, not because someone allowed me to, but because I know exactly who I am." She turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need an apology. Her steps were light, but with each one she took, the room seemed to empty further. When the door closed behind her, Alexander stood there, no speech, no smile, just watching. And then he whispered, as if only to himself, "She's the only one who asked for nothing. So I gave her everything." In a grand room where billionaire Alexander Astoria's will was to be read, a woman walked in, wearing an old cardigan, silent flats, and eyes no one bothered to notice. They laughed at her, called her a leech, took photos, and posted them online, not knowing that she was the legal wife of the very man they were hoping to inherit from. When her name was read aloud as the sole heir, the room spiraled into chaos, and the truth exploded when Alexander appeared, revealing he was never dead and that everything had been a test of character. Every person who insulted or belittled her was cut from the will, not by her vengeance, but by her silence and unshakable dignity, which stood as the harshest judgment of all. And when she walked away, no raised head, no final word, the room fell silent, as if none of them had ever truly existed. Perhaps the most painful part wasn't that they mocked her, but that they thought it was completely normal. They didn't care who she was. All it took was that she didn't wear the right clothes, didn't speak the right way, didn't carry the right logo, and that alone made her beneath them. But that very mindset cost them the one thing truly worth having, the chance to face a real human being and to be part of her story. Today's story isn't just a grand reversal, it's a reminder. True worth doesn't come from how others see you. It comes from how you stand firm when an entire room turns its back on you. Isabel didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to prove herself with wealth. She only needed one thing: dignity and the truth. To me, the lesson is clearer than ever. Never judge someone by what they wear. And if you're the one being dismissed, don't fall, because you just might be holding a truth powerful enough to bring down an entire system. If this story left you speechless, if it made you rethink how you see others or how others have seen you, leave a comment below. We want to hear your voice. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, please like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story so you won't miss the next emotional journey that might change your perspective or maybe even change your life.